At 50, the tragedy of 50 Cent is beyond heartbeaking. At 50 years old, Curtis 50 Cent. Jackson has money, fame, power, and still sleeps like a man expecting someone to kick in the door. This isn't the fairy tale ending the American dream promised. This is the story of a boy from South Jamaica who survived bullets, betrayal, and the music industry, only to become trapped inside the myth he created. Is that success or a polished life sentence? Tonight on Legends of Black Excellence, we're pulling back the curtain on the tragedy behind 50 Cent's glory. Before we dive in, hit subscribe, smash that. Like and tell me, are you really ready for this truth? From South Jamaica to the candy shop, the rise of 50 Cent. Curtis James Jackson III, better known as 50 Cent, is more than a name in hip-hop. It is a saga of survival. Born on July 6, 1975 in South Jamaica, Queens, he came from a world where childhood ended early. His mother, Sabrina, a teenage dealer, was murdered when he was only 8, leaving him to navigate a neighborhood ruled by poverty, fear, and the drug trade. By 12, he was selling narcotics on street corners. By 19, he was arrested for possession of weapons and drugs. That brutal upbringing carved into him the hunger and hardness that would later fuel his rise. In a society that promised the American dream on television, but delivered despair on the sidewalks, Curtis learned that to exist, he had to fight. That fight turned into music. Under the name 50 Cent, a symbol of grit and defiance, he began turning street scars into verses that felt like confessions carved in metal. Success arrived quickly. A record deal with Columbia Records, the debut album Power of the Dollar, and an industry starting to take notice. But in May 2000, his life nearly ended when he was shot 9 times outside his grandmother's home. Bullets tore through his face, arm, and legs. Doctors doubted he would ever speak again. Columbia dropped him immediately, and the streets whispered that his name would be engraved on a tombstone. For most, that would have been the end. For him, it was the beginning of legend. Rising from that pool of blood, 50 Cent transformed trauma into power. He rebuilt his career from nothing, eventually releasing Get Rich or Die Tryin', which sold nearly 1 million copies its first week. Yet behind the platinum plaques lay the weight of near death and betrayal. He was hailed as invincible, but survival came with a curse: constant vigilance, distrust, and solitude. The tragedy of 50 Cent at 50 isn't about loss. It's about a man who conquered everything except peace. The child of the streets, born into deals, not dreams. Curtis James Jackson III entered life as if he were the fine print in a contract he never signed. His mother, Sabrina Jackson, was barely 15 when she had him a teenager trying to survive in South Jamaica by moving product in a business dominated by men. In that environment, affection wasn't a language, it was a risk. Vulnerability could get you robbed, jailed, or killed. For Curtis, home was not a safe place, but a temporary shelter standing between raids, arguments, and deals, whispered late at night. On television, polished anchors talked about opportunity and hard work, showing polished images of men like Bill Gates and Ronald Reagan as proof that anyone could make it if they just believed. Then the TV switched off, the room went dark, and outside the window were sirens, gunshots, and neighbors who didn't dream of college, they just hoped to see tomorrow. When Sabrina died in a suspicious blaze, the system treated her like a statistic, not a mother. Curtis was sent to live with his grandmother in a crowded house, another child squeezed into a small bedroom, another mouth in a home already stretched thin. There was no safety net, only survival. By 12, he wasn't riding bikes or doing homework. He was on corners learning the codes of a trade his mother had once worked, selling narcotics to keep himself afloat. Every transaction carried risk. Every night could end in a cell or on a sidewalk. At 19, that risk caught up. He was arrested with drugs and firearms, not as a kingpin, but as another kid who'd been pushed into a game designed to discard him. While America preached the American dream through glossy success stories, Curtis was living in the fine print disclaimer, not valid in certain neighborhoods. What saved him from disappearing entirely wasn't mercy from the streets, but a new language music. In a friend's basement, he began turning his experiences into rhymes, not as entertainment at first, but as a way to make sense of a life where nothing felt secure. That raw honesty caught the ear of Jam Master Jay, the legendary DJ from Run DMC. Jay saw more than a hustler trying to rap. He recognized timing, cadence, and an instinct for storytelling that couldn't be taught. He pulled Curtis into a real studio, showed him how to structure verses, how to ride a beat, how to channel rage into rhythm. Suddenly, the boy who had once watched music videos from a cramped living room was standing in the same lineage as the pioneers who helped build hip-hop into a global force. As his confidence grew, Curtis adopted a new identity. 50 Cent, a moniker that hinted at danger, change, and value all at once. Columbia Records offered him a recording deal, and he started crafting tracks that didn't just boast, but named names and rattled egos. In one infamous record, he took aim at more than 30 prominent figures, from giants like Jay-Z and Nas to aggressive voices like DMX. That audacity signaled something deeper than clout chasing. It was the fury of a kid from South Jamaica kicking the door of a world that had pretended he didn't exist. From a burned-out childhood to a major label contract, his journey looked like a miracle from the outside. But beneath the headlines and diss tracks was a more painful truth. Every step forward still felt like walking on a floor that could collapse at any second. And that fragile foundation is what makes his story at 50 not just remarkable, but profoundly heartbreaking. 9 bullets and a vanished future. There is a moment in Curtis Jackson's life when success stops feeling like a blessing and starts looking like a trapdoor. After grinding his way out of Queens and cutting his first major project for Columbia Records, he finally seemed poised for the breakthrough he'd dreamed about. The album was done. The streets were buzzing. The industry was watching. Then one morning in 2000, as he stood outside his grandmother's home, that fragile momentum was shattered. A car pulled up. A gunman opened fire, and 9 rounds tore through his body, one through his cheek, others ripping into his arm and legs. He hit the pavement, bleeding teeth, blown-out jaw, damaged so badly that doctors warned he might never rap again. In an instant, the future he'd fought for was replaced by hospital light surgeries and the sound of ventilators. While he struggled to heal, the business machine that had courted him moved just as quickly in the opposite direction. Columbia Records, wary of controversy and scared of being tied to street violence, quietly cut him loose. The same name that had seemed promising on paper was now branded as a liability. Behind closed doors, executives called him too dangerous bad news, someone who might drag their entire roster into problems they didn't want to touch. Fortune had come with strings attached, and once bullets entered the picture, those strings turned into a noose. Instead of being protected or supported while he recovered, he was treated like a case to be closed and forgotten. The message was clear: you can be profitable, but you cannot bring real danger into an industry that only wants the aesthetic of the streets, not the consequences. Whispers in corners and back rooms gave his shooting an even darker outline. Shortly before the attack, he had recorded a track known as Ghetto Quran, a song that laid out in grim detail the history of hustlers in Queens, including notorious figure Kenneth Supreme McGriff. To hip-hop fans, it sounded like unfiltered reportage. To people with real stakes in that underworld, it looked like exposure. After the single spread rumors multiplied, some said the lyrics crossed an invisible line, that naming names brought heat no one wanted. When he was later riddled with bullets, many connected the dots, not with evidence a court could use, but with the kind of logic born from living around retaliation. New York police opened a file, collected shell casings, took photos, and then watched the case stall, citing lack of cooperation. On paper, it became one more unresolved shooting in a city already full of them. Street talk pointed toward a man known as Daryl Homo Ball, a feared presence in Queens said to have ties to the same circles referenced in Ghetto Quran. People claimed he was the shooter, though nothing was proved formally. Then, in a twist that felt ripped from a crime script, Ball himself was gunned down months later. No trial, no closure, just another body, another silence. To observers, it looked like cleaning up loose ends. For Curtis, it meant living with the knowledge that someone had tried hard to erase him, and the one individual many believed responsible had been erased instead. His attackers were never officially held accountable. The label that once believed in him walked away. Law enforcement moved on. Standing in the middle of all that, with scars on his face and a career in ruins, he learned a brutal lesson in his world: elevation can attract bullets as quickly as it brings applause, and sometimes the higher you climb, the more your good fortune becomes the bait in someone else's trap. Building an empire from rejection. When the record industry treated Curtis Jackson like a problem to be erased, he made a ruthless decision. If one arena refused him, he would conquer another. Burned by label politics and tired of waiting for corporate approval, he stopped trying to squeeze back into a system that had already stamped him too risky. Instead of chasing another rap contract, he turned his scars, instincts, and obsession with power into raw material for a different medium: television. He wasn't content to be a featured guest in someone else's script. He wanted to be the one calling the shots, choosing the angles, deciding who wins and who falls. Out of that ambition came an idea, a story about a charismatic drug boss trying to leave the underworld behind and become a legitimate mogul. It was crime, ambition, betrayal, and longing for redemption rolled into one. It was fiction, but it sounded uncomfortably close to reality. To turn that idea into something real, he teamed up with writer Courtney Kemp, a sharp storyteller who understood structure, character, and dialogue the way he understood survival. Together, they built Power, a series centered on James "Ghost" St. Patrick, a nightclub owner and narcotics kingpin torn between two lives. Ghost is polished in a suit, lethal in a dark alley, and trapped between the world he wants and the life that made him. In many ways, Ghost is a mirror of Curtis. Different name, different setting, but the same war between past and future. Kemp shaped the narrative arcs, mapped out seasons, and wove in complex relationships. Jackson brought authenticity, details from years in Queens, and a deep understanding of how it feels when danger walks beside you like a shadow. It wasn't a glossy, sanitized drama. It was sharp-edged, soaked in consequence, and unapologetically grounded in realities most networks prefer to keep off prime time. With scripts in hand, they did what any creators do: they knocked on doors. First came meetings with HBO, the prestige giant known for boundary-pushing series. The response was cool, compelling, but too grim, too raw, too centered on people who don't fit the heroic image executives like to market. Then came Showtime, another heavyweight in adult drama, and Paramount with its legacy and reach. The answers, in different wording, meant the same thing: no. The show was dismissed as too intense, too close to the headlines, too focused on characters from neighborhoods the industry would rather use as backdrops than as the heart of a story. Each rejection could have been the end. Instead, Curtis treated those closed doors like fuel. If they wouldn't let him in through the front, he'd build his own entrance. That determination gave birth to G-Unit Films and Television Inc., his own production outfit. He poured money, time, and reputation into the project, refusing to dilute the concept just to make it more palatable. With his company behind it, he cut together a pilot and took it to Starz, a smaller network without the same prestige as HBO, but with something more valuable to him: willingness to take a chance. Starz said yes. Power premiered, drew devoted viewers, and exploded into a phenomenon, spawning sequels and spin-offs until there was an entire connected world, what audiences now call the Power universe. The man who had been sidelined by music executives became an architect of one of television's most talked-about crime sagas. He turned dismissal into leverage, insult into ownership. From rejection letters and too dangerous labels, he carved out an empire where he no longer had to beg for a seat. He owned the table, the cameras, and the story itself, and that at its core is the most haunting part of his tragedy. He had to be shut out completely before he was allowed to rule. The price of being feared. At the summit of his influence, Curtis Jackson occupied a world most people only glimpse through glossy magazine covers and viral clips. There were marble floors, tinted SUVs, glass-walled meeting rooms high above the city. Assistants hovered with schedules, lawyers arrived with binders, security teams flanked doors and elevators. On paper, he had everything: properties, brands, television hits, global recognition. Yet walking through those corridors, he sensed something colder than the air conditioning. Conversations stopped when he entered. Jokes softened. Bodies stiffened. People addressed him with careful respect, never relaxed familiarity. Fear had become his armor and his new skin. It protected him from disrespect, from betrayal, from open challenges. But it also meant that almost no one around him treated him like a human being. To them, he was a figure to be managed, appeased, and never truly known. That climate shaped the way he moved through each day. He rarely sat with his back to a doorway. He checked the angles of rooms without even thinking, scanning faces, reading small shifts in tone and expression. Long before he signed contracts, he had learned that a smile could hide an agenda and a handshake could cover a knife. Now those instincts ruled even the most ordinary moments. Business partners saw a disciplined executive. What they didn't see was the quiet tension in his shoulders when silence lingered too long, or the way he cataloged who was standing where. Night offered no relief. While others in his position might sink into deep, luxurious sleep, he rested in shallow intervals, waking at the slightest unfamiliar sound. The past had taught him that disaster doesn't send invitations. It kicks in the door. His body never fully believed the danger was over. As his empire expanded, the circle around him actually shrank. Every additional deal brought new teams, but not more closeness. Staff were polite, efficient, even loyal, but their loyalty was always tied to checks, opportunities, access. In interviews, he projected confidence, cracking jokes and mocking rivals, but behind those performances was a man who could not completely switch off defense mode. Trust became the rarest commodity in his life, more valuable than any royalty statement. Old friends from the neighborhood felt out of place in boardrooms. New acquaintances from the corporate world couldn't relate to the trauma that shaped him. One group knew his history, but not his present. The other understood his portfolio, but not his nightmares. Between those two worlds, he stood largely alone, and the persona that had shielded him on the streets now boxed him into a corner at the top. That is the cruel cost of being feared. The more intimidating you become, the harder it is for anyone to love you without hesitation. The fortress he built to keep threats away also kept out tenderness, honesty, and ease. Every layer of security added distance. Every story of his ruthlessness, every headline about his latest victory reinforced the idea that he didn't need comfort, only obedience. From the outside, people saw a winner who had mastered survival, a powerhouse who always landed on his feet. From the inside, his daily reality looked more like solitary confinement with better furniture. He could alter careers with a phone call, but he couldn't dial a number just to admit he was tired. At 50, his greatest irony is that the toughness that saved his life now isolates him. The legend thrives on intimidation. The man quietly pays for it with sleepless nights and a heart that no longer knows what normal safety feels like. The warrior with no war left to fight. By 2025, Curtis Jackson stands beneath the neon haze of Las Vegas, the city of excess, as a veteran of every kind of battle except the one inside his own chest. A 6-show engagement worth $5 million confirms what the billboards already scream. His name still sells out arenas. His catalog still rattles speakers. His legend still draws crowds from every corner of the world. The stage is enormous, screens blaze with his image, and thousands of voices roar in unison when he walks out in a black vest and chains glittering under the lights. From a distance, it looks like the culmination of everything he ever fought for: money, status, recognition. Yet as the bass shakes the floor, his gaze keeps drifting past the crowd toward the side of the stage where there are no cameras, only shadows. The warrior is present, but the war feels long over. There was a time when conflict itself gave his life momentum. He clashed publicly with figures like Ja Rule, Diddy, Rick Ross, Fat Joe, trading insults, dropping tracks, turning rivalries into fuel and promotion. Those feuds were more than entertainment. They were proof that he mattered, that he was dangerous, that his voice could shake the entire genre. Every new record felt like a strike, every headline like another victory. But the culture shifted. Tastes changed. The era of diss records dominating conversation faded into playlists, streams, and viral dances. The old adversaries moved on, made peace, or slipped quietly into their own corners. The battlefield that once defined him slowly dissolved, leaving him in a strange peace he never asked for. Now, when he looks around, there are no worthy opponents left, only his own reflection staring back. In that calm routine takes over. He rises early, eats according to a strict plan, trains his body with the precision of a soldier who refuses to soften. He arrives at offices and sets where people wait for instructions, where contracts await signatures, where projects need his stamp. None of it is about survival anymore. It's maintenance. Keeping the machine running. Keeping the brand hot enough that no one can say he has slipped. He tells himself that if he keeps moving new deals, new productions, new ventures, he won't have to confront the silence that creeps in when the meetings end. Rest doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like an ambush. He's admitted in more reflective moments that if he ever truly stops, something inside him might collapse before his body ever does. So he chooses motion over stillness, grind over reflection, forward momentum over the risk of looking too closely at what all of this has cost. That is why his confession, "I win everything except myself," cuts deeper than any lyric. On paper, he has conquered every external obstacle: poverty, violence, industry, rejection, public doubt, even bullets. On stage in Las Vegas, he can lift his arms and bask in a wave of applause that would drown another man. But when the music dies, when he steps off into the dim corridor behind the curtain, the truth returns. The fighter remains wired for danger in a world that no longer offers worthy battles. The emptiness isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, waiting in hotel rooms and long flights, and moments when his phone finally stops buzzing. At 50, Curtis Jackson is a warrior with no war left to fight, still marching, still armored, terrified not of losing, but of what might surface if he ever lets himself put the armor down. A legend who was born to survive, not to win. By the time Curtis Jackson reached 50, his life story had already hardened into something larger than biography. The breakout moment was Get Rich or Die, trying a debut that moved about 872,000 copies in its first week and eventually climbed past roughly 12 million sold worldwide. That record didn't just chart, it detonated. Backed by Eminem and Dr. Dre, he stepped into the spotlight as a fully formed force, scarred, ruthless, and undeniably charismatic. Every track carried the edge of someone who had walked through real danger, and listeners felt it. For a while, his voice was the sound of an era booming from car stereos, corner stores, clubs, and gyms. The image of the bulletproof vest, the relentless hooks, the cold wit in his bars all fused into a single idea. Here is a man the world tried to erase, and he refused to go quietly. But survival at that level started to blur into something more complicated. As years passed, Curtis didn't fade like countless other artists whose moment comes and goes. He built television franchises, dropped memoirs, launched brands, toured stadiums, and stayed embedded in pop culture. People began calling him a living legend, and on the surface, that sounds like the ultimate compliment. Underneath it carries pressure. Legends aren't allowed to break down. They aren't allowed to step back and say, "I'm tired." For someone whose identity is welded to the idea of being unkillable, the expectation of endless strength becomes its own cage. The applause never fully stops, the spotlight never completely switches off, and the demand to remain larger than life can feel less like honor and more like a life sentence. Meanwhile, the environment that once revolved around him kept shifting. A different crop of stars rewrote the sound of hip-hop Drake, folding melody and vulnerability into chart-topping anthems. Kendrick Lamar delivering dense social commentary with surgical precision. Travis Scott turning performances into immersive spectacles. Younger listeners discovered 50 Cent through playlists, TikTok snippets, film soundtracks often as retro energy rather than present tense domination. The drums, hooks, and threats on his old records started to feel like a timestamp for the early 2000s, the way certain rock songs instantly transport people back to another decade. His catalog became a backdrop for workouts, nostalgia nights, and cinematic gunfights. He didn't vanish. Instead, he transformed into atmosphere, an audible reminder of a rougher, hungrier phase in the culture's memory. And yet for him, easing into the role of elder statesman isn't simple. The persona he crafted, relentless, untouchable, never backing down, doesn't leave much room for vulnerability or retirement. If he disappears for too long, speculation starts: is he finished? Is the aura gone? So he keeps moving, developing series, announcing new ventures, dropping sharp comments online, staying just noisy enough that no one dares write an ending for him. That constant motion is both shield and burden. The legacy of a man who refused to die is not just about the records sold or the empires built. It's about the cost of never being allowed to stop fighting. Curtis Jackson outlasted Bullet's poverty industry betrayal and changing trends. The tragedy is that his greatest victory, never being forgotten, also means he may never truly be free to simply lay the armor down and live as anything other than 50 Cent, the indestructible myth. At 50, Curtis 50 Cent. Jackson stands as the ultimate paradox of black excellence, a man who beat the streets, the industry, and even death itself, yet still moves like someone who can't afford to exhale. His catalog shaped an era, his shows reshaped television, and his image became shorthand for survival against impossible odds. But here on Legends of Black Excellence, we have to ask, when the price of greatness is endless, vigilance, is that still victory or just a more expensive kind of prison? Drop your thoughts below. Is 50 Cent free or forever locked inside his own legend?